Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Palmer. Tonight we're speaking about Lawrence Livermore Labs. With me is Scott Yundt, staff attorney for Tri-Valley Cares. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks for having me, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
So tell me about the organization and what you do.
Sure. So Tri-Valley Cares, which stands for Communities Against a Radioactive Environment, was started in 1983 by concerned citizens who were living around Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. That year is significant, and I wanted to just pause before I talk more about the group to mention that the largest arrest of protesters in Alameda County history didn't occur at Occupy Oakland. It actually occurred at Livermore Lab in 1983, and over 1,500 protesters were arrested. This didn't only get national attention, but it really raised awareness in the community about the nuclear weapons facility that they had in their midst. And at that point, local citizens realized they needed to have a local group because many of the protesters were coming in from more traditionally progressive areas of California like Berkeley and Oakland and Santa Cruz and San Francisco. But there was a real concern in the community about the facility that they had right there. So the citizens got together and created Tri-Valley Cares, and we've been going strong ever since. And now we have about 5,000 members from all over California, all over the Bay Area, and even nationally. And we're kind of unique in that some of our members are former and current lab employees, and also employees at other Department of Energy nuclear weapons facilities. They have an interest in having their employer be watchdogged and monitored by a community group. So they're very interested in our work. Not all of them, of course, but some of them are. And also many of them live in the community of Livermore, so they have an interest in that way as well.
So you have a window into what's going on.
We do, via those employees who are our members, and in fact some of our board members are former nuclear weapons scientists themselves. So we use their knowledge often to kind of digest the very complicated documents and information that we do receive from the lab. We do have to resort to using the Freedom of Information Act frequently to get information, and oftentimes it is rightly redacted or remains classified because we're not trying to obtain nuclear secrets, but oftentimes we also have to challenge some of those redactions because we're getting information about activities at the lab that shouldn't be classified. So that's a constant battle, is kind of our truth-telling campaign about what's happening at Livermore Lab.
That part of your job, I imagine, is to file the briefs or what's needed to
Exactly. I do a lot of Freedom of Information Act litigation, and we've been successful. We've sued them over a dozen times on Freedom of Information Act issues and been successful every time. And it's an important part of our work, not just so that the community finds out this information, but actually to challenge the information, their PR machine. Because if you look at the lab's own website, if you read their press releases, it's
all feel-good stuff.
Exactly. Right? It's basically greenwashing of nuclear weapons work. I showed you a visual earlier, but it's a chart that shows what the budget of Livermore Lab still is. It's what the budget request for 2013 is going to be.
1.1 billion?
Yeah, 1.125 billion is the total Department of Energy National Nuclear Security Administration budget for the lab. 1 billion of that 1.125 billion is for nuclear weapons activities. So all of that other work they do, their renewable energy research that they like to tout, the weather research, the science that they do actually makes up less than 15% of what they do. 88%
and some of those individually
weapons.
are a small fraction of 1%.
Exactly.
Yes.
And one thing that we would really like to see them doing more of is cleanup work and cleanup technologies, because nuclear weapons work around the country has created a really disturbing legacy of contamination. Lawrence Livermore National Lab is a Superfund site. It's on the national priorities list of the most contaminated sites in the country, and has been since 1990. It is being cleaned up. We have a contaminated groundwater there that is the plume extends underneath the community, including houses and a school. And they're actively cleaning it up, but the time schedule that they're doing this cleanup is about 75 years. So we would like to see the cleanup happen much more efficiently, much quicker. And we'd like to see them do investment in research for how to clean up radiation in the environment, how to clean up other toxic chemicals and things that nuclear weapons work have put into the environment.
Do you see elevated cancer rates in the community?
We have, I would say it goes understudied, but there have been some public health studies that have found increased rates of childhood melanoma, specifically in people who grew up in Livermore having melanoma in their 20s. There's also an increased rate of cancer, specifically melanoma, among lab employees. And then there have been other studies that have showed increased rates of cancer, specifically in children in the community.
Increased being how much?
Well, the melanoma in children is about a 6-fold increase.
6-fold.
Mm-hmm. Which is still a small number of individual cancers, but it's a significant increase in the
You don't usually
level.
See that sort of cancer in children, do you?
You don't, or young people, yeah.
No.
It's fairly rare. And
right.
When that study first came out, the lab said, well, that's because children in Livermore are getting much more sun. So the department, the government agency that conducted the study, did the same study for San Joaquin County, which is the neighboring county. Livermore Lab's actually in Alameda County. A lot of people don't realize Livermore's in Alameda County, but the next county inland is San Joaquin County, which is arguably more sunny than Livermore is, and the increase in rates of melanoma was actually higher in Livermore compared to San Joaquin County than compared to the state of California overall. So that kind of proved the lab's theory wrong. So they validated that study.
What sort of weapons do you have to pressure them? How do you try to
How do we pressure the weapons designers with weapons?
That's right.
The main legal hook that we have are environmental laws. So the National Environmental Policy Act, and just enforcing our Clean Water Act, our Clean Air Act, the Superfund law. All of those laws help us to, kind of combat some of the things that they are planning to do. But in terms of how to challenge the continuing weapons work there, I think it really is a moral argument, and then it's also we challenge their funding. And so one thing we do every year with groups from around the country like Tri-Valley Cares, the Livermore Lab is part of a complex, the nuclear weapons complex. There's many sites around the country, 8 sites that are specific NNSA nuclear weapons facilities. They either do research and development like Livermore Lab or manufacturing of nuclear weapons. Each of those sites has a group like Tri-Valley Cares. And we long ago created an alliance called the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability. We have an alliance office in Washington, D.C., and every year we gather there. All 36 groups in the alliance go to Washington, D.C., and we meet with our representatives, and we meet with agency officials, we meet with committees that are relevant to this issue, and make really powerful arguments for cutting the nuclear weapons budget, which is another graph that I brought, you might have seen.
Yeah, less warheads, but more money to make them.
Exactly. So you might have heard of the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which is a treaty with Russia that does reduce our number of nuclear weapons. And we have been making cuts to nuclear weapons active stockpile. What happens to those weapons, you can't really call it dismantlement, and that's a long story. We just store the weapons when we take them out of the active stockpile. But that number of the active stockpile is going down. It's supposed to go down to 1,550 pursuant to the treaty over about the next decade. We've already started that decade, so it's winding down towards this number of 1,550, which is an important step. However, in politically politicalizing that deal and getting the ratification of the START treaty, there was a deal with the nuclear weapons laboratories, with the Department of Energy, National Nuclear Security Administration, who have those weapons, that if they were going to agree and be complacent in that reduction, they demanded major investment in our nuclear weapons complex and in the stockpile itself. So this has two elements. The first is 3 new nuclear weapons complex facilities to basically make it so that our manufacturing of nuclear weapons have 3 large new complex facilities to house them. One at Los Alamos, it's for plutonium pits, one at Oak Ridge, Tennessee for the uranium secondaries, and one in Kansas City, Missouri to make the nuclear weapons components. The cost for these facilities is $80 billion plus. And the timeline, which is really what disturbs me the most, is that they're not going to be ready to be in production until 2020, 2024. So it's committing us to have a brand new nuclear weapons manufacturing capability 15 years from now. And that is just not the vision that the administration, I think, has for our nuclear weapons complex, or that most Americans have for it 20 years after the Cold War.
I don't think most Americans know of any of these things you just spoke about.
I think so, and
I certainly didn't.
Yeah, and then the other part of it is called the Life Extension Program for our nuclear weapons. It's basically health care for our nuclear weapons. We don't have health care, but our nuclear weapons are getting it. Yes. And this program is taking all of the individual weapons, and they'll take them out of the stockpile and open them up and refurbish or replace them with new parts. Initially, we expected these new parts to be exactly the same as the old parts. But they've decided that in certain instances they want to tinker with them and maybe pull some parts from this weapon and add it to this one to give it new capabilities, and pull some parts from over here that are cool, and give themselves reasons to spend a whole lot of money doing this program. And the costs for it have soared to $100 billion for our weapons to all go through this life extension program process. And it's just going to keep escalating as Department of Energy projects generally do. And it's also going to take a very long time. We're doing things with weapons. One's called the B-61, which is the weapon we have in NATO countries in Europe. NATO countries have expressed the desire to not have American nuclear weapons in them anymore and to phase out American nuclear weapons. Despite that request, despite the fact that that's likely going to happen, we've committed to taking all of the weapons that are there, spending billions of dollars on life extension programs for them to make them anew. It makes no sense at all, but it was...
Was this a Bush administration program?
No, this was all actually part of the START deal, which is an Obama administration program. So it's very disappointing. It's, I think, something that's really a legacy of having this large complex, of having, which is a very powerful complex. They're used to getting huge amounts of money. We generally see them get a blank check in that whatever they ask for every year, Congress gives them, with very few cuts, which is why it's so important for the Alliance to go to Washington, D.C. every year to be really the sole voice of the people saying, we want this budget cut. And it sounds like tons of money. Compared to our military budget, it's really not as much. I mean, we spend a huge amount on the military industrial complex in this country, and our nuclear weapons is just a piece. But it's still an important piece, and it's a piece that we've actually heard Pentagon officials say they're ready to spend less on nuclear weapons. Our military is ready to not depend on nuclear weapons anymore. They see them as obsolete. They would rather have other weapons, and I'm not advocating for that. I would prefer that we...
Drones. And
yeah, exact things of that nature. But they'd rather spend money on other things besides nuclear weapons. So the fact that we're going forward with these huge expenditures just really makes no sense. But I have some good news in that our efforts last year resulted in a pause and hopefully a permanent pause on the plutonium facility at Los Alamos that they have already spent a bunch of money on, but the administration decided to put it on a 5-year hold. And that is signaling maybe a turn in this huge expansion that was dealt in the START treaty. Now, of course, Republican weapons hawks who worked very hard to get this deal for the NNSA are really upset that the administration is going against their commitment that they made during the START negotiations. However, you can't commit the Congress to make a certain level of expenditures for years on end. So every year they're supposed to look at it. So the deal was that they would look at it every year, and luckily some sense has come to both the administration and to certain representatives who decided to make a cut to the CMRR, or the plutonium facility at Los Alamos. So hopefully that will continue.
Wow. Is this election year a opportunity to pressure Obama and get this issue out in front of the people?
Well, in terms of nuclear weapons, I think what's most important about this election year is what seems like a clear intention on the Obama administration, if reelected, to move forward with ratification of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. We have informally agreed to not test nuclear weapons in this country. We've signed the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, but it has not yet been ratified by the Senate. The battle over the New START treaty, which is really a much more modest treaty, or many in the nuclear weapons community might view it as not as important as the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. It really signaled the kind of battle that's going to happen over the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which is going to be a major battle. But hopefully we'll have a situation in the Senate and the Obama administration together to move forward with a Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty ratification in the new administration. I also think on the budget issue, if the Obama administration is reelected, we will see some additional cuts. I would hope to maybe some of those life extension programs that I mentioned. The other two projects in the complex that I mentioned are really too far down the road at this point to stop. Maybe we could get some limits to the one at Oak Ridge, the uranium secondary plant, which is called the Uranium Processing Facility. We're working hard to come up with, to give ideas for how that project could be cut and limited and scaled back. And, yeah.
Scott, we have a couple of minutes left, about a minute. Part of your website talks about your vision for what could be happening at the Lawrence Livermore Labs, about research in a wholly different areas to help people and help society. What's your vision there?
Well, our members have really developed a vision over the years of Livermore Lab doing the kind of cleanup technologies research that I mentioned, but also things like climate change research, the effects that climate change is going to have, research into that. Renewable energy, Livermore is located in a good place to be doing renewable energy research, and they do some. But the kind of investment that they're able to make in nuclear weapons at the facility, over $1 billion a year, if they were making that kind of investment in renewable energy technologies, I think they could make huge strides.
In a sane society, they would be.
Yes.
Yeah. So Scott, we wanted to talk a bit about the bioweaponry research going on at Lawrence Livermore.
Sure. So after the anthrax attacks on the House and Senate office buildings in Washington, D.C. back in 2001, the government made a large pool of money available for agencies to do biodefense research. The Department of Homeland Security decided that it was interested in doing some of this research, and the Livermore Lab bid to do some of that for them. So what they decided to do was have a biosafety level 3 laboratory built at Livermore Lab. It's actually very small. It's in a mobile trailer, really, in one of the parking lots. This facility does work with bioagents, high-level bioagents, including anthrax, botulism, the plague, things that inherently might be weaponized by a terrorist organization. They're researching how those agents might be weaponized, how they are dispersed. They do things like aerosolizing bioagents. They genetically modify bioagents. They expose small animals to these agents and then see what the effects are. They've developed agents that are not affected by antibiotics, that have no real antidote. This kind of research is very scary, not only to the local community, but to the international community. So when we heard about this facility, which was in about 2003, Tri-Valley Cares brought suit under the National Environmental Policy Act on a whole bunch of different reasons, from the impacts that an earthquake might have that were totally unstudied in the environmental review, on the impacts that a release might have from any number of sources. The court was only interested in one of the impacts, and that was a potential terrorist act on the facility, which had gone unstudied. So they forced the lab, we won initially, they forced the lab to go back and do an analysis of the impacts of a terrorist attack on this facility. In our opinion, they did a very limited investigation as to what those impacts were. They basically said there would be no impact, and came up with all sorts of magical scenarios why, including that if an airplane hit the facility, all of the bioagents would burn up. And if a fire would start and the sprinklers would go off, and there was just all sorts of ways they came up with why the bioagents would never get released from this facility.
Well, Scott Yundt, it's been a pleasure having you come here and talk to us. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. I hope you'll come back and tell us more.
I'd love to, and if people are interested in Tri-Valley Cares, I urge them to check out our website, www.trivalleycares.org.
How do you donate? Can you donate on this site?
You can donate on the website, and it's got our contact information if people would like to volunteer or intern. We have student interns all year round, legal interns and undergraduate student interns, and lots of volunteers. They're really the backbone of the organization. And we also do we participate in 2 protests at the gates of the lab every year and organize one with other groups. Specifically, that's in August, and it commemorates the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Very good.
Yeah, and so I urge people to learn about that.
And what's the other protest?
The other is on Good Friday. It actually just happened.
I see.
Yeah, and people do nonviolent direct action at the gates of the lab, and it's really powerful, and there's good speakers, and it's a good time. So
great.
I invite people out to that.
Well, Scott, thank you for your work,
Yeah,
and thank you for coming.
Really
good to meet
appreciate
you.
it. You too.
Good. And thank you for watching. Good night.